So the middle story, we say, there's no mystery there. The Parshat Hashua deals with the miraculous blessing to Sarah that although having been barren her whole life and now being indeed after menopause, and the Parsha says clearly that the monthly cycle returns to her, so too the Shunammite woman, barren, elderly, in the same way as blessed by the prophet Elisha. What about the continuation? What about this resuscitation, the bringing back from the dead? So actually, if we revert to the original words of the Shunammite woman, where she says, in a sense, don't lie to me, but the Hebrew word is a bit different. She says, Al techazev. And kazav does mean falsehood, but it comes from an expression that is used regarding rivers that sometimes flow and sometimes don't. Maim kozvim. And so it implies something which is maybe sometimes true, but then stops. And so too, she wasn't saying that she would not come pregnant, but it would require for an elderly woman a equal miracle for her to be able to actually give birth. Especially, as the commentaries say, that the angel in Parshat Vayera says, I will return to you. And it is explained that because two blessings are needed, one visitation for the conception, one for the birth. Elisha doesn't say this. So according to one commentary, the Shunammite woman is afraid that she will become pregnant but not have a successful childbirth. But in general, the idea is that part of the blessing could come true, but maybe will not be sustainable. And indeed, that is what seems to have happened when the boy died. And so the bringing back to life of the boy represents not only the miracle of his birth, but how this blessing is only complete when he also has health. So we have fertility and health, his survival. And so too, we can connect it to the Parsha. Isaac, his birth is promised, it happens. But his survival is also threatened by this incredible story at the end, where God says to take him up as an offering, in Hebrew, v'ha'aleu, which means to raise him. So it doesn't have to mean to sacrifice him. But Avram, in this test, in a sense, correctly understood that what he is supposed to do in the aspect of being tested. He passed this test. The angel stops him at the last minute. And he had already put him on the altar. So he had already fulfilled va'aleu to bring him up. And this was this incredible test of Abraham after saying that he will only have one son from Sarah. In his name, Isaac's name, his progeny, his descendants will be called, and to take this one son and then say, in a sense, to kill him. But Avram asked no questions. He was completely devoted to God. It's for many people, a disturbing story. Time does not permit going into how we know and how Avram could be absolutely sure that this was a true revelation from God, in whose hands life and death lies. But in any case, in a sense, survival of Yitzchak, his not having to be sacrificed, then going on to marry Rivka and beginning the Jewish people, represents that in addition to the blessing for his birth, there is this idea that there has to be sustainability, the continuity of his life. And so again, we see a second parallel between the Parshat, where Isaac is not only born, but survives the experience of the Akedah, as it's called, the binding of Yitzchak. And so too, the son of the Shunammite is not only born, but is actually brought back to life after dying by the prophet Elisha. What about the beginning episode? There, it's a bit more difficult to connect it. We have this woman coming, and she's very poor. So the beginning of the Haftara, in a sense, begins with an act of chesed, of loving kindness. In this instance, she sees no other way of relieving her situation short of getting a blessing from the great prophet Elisha. And we know that the very beginning of Parshat Vayera is also chesed, loving kindness. The three angels, who Abraham does not know that they are angels, he thinks they are simple wayfarers. Indeed, he believes, as Rashi explains, that they are idolatrous wayfarers. They serve idols. He invites them in. You must stay. You must eat. And that is one aspect of chesed. The very fact that God reveals himself to Abraham. And Rashi, based on the Talmud, says that God is fulfilling the commandment of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. Because it is God who gives the example of loving kindness. And the examples are given, giving clothes to the naked, food to the hungry. And here, succor, comfort, and visitation to the ill. And we are meant to emulate these ways. So the very beginning of the Parsha is loving kindness. And so too the beginning of the Haftara is Elisha in this role of helping the woman to regain enough money by selling the oil to pay off her creditors. In addition to that, we know Avram was unique in his generation. He was unique in his faith in the one God, which he rediscovered. Of course, he was not unique for long. He successfully propagated this faith and had thousands and thousands of followers. But at first, indeed, he's referred to in the prophetic writings as Avram HaIvri, the Hebrew. And it's explained, it is from the word avar, or aver, one side, Avram being on one side of the world, everybody else being on the other, a lone believer in monotheism. So Elisha, in a sense, was also lone, but not in faith, but in chesed, in helping. How do we know that? Let's keep in mind that the wife of Ovadia, the widow, she was not living in a non-Jewish milieu. So this creditor who wanted to take her two sons, as slaves, in fact, was Jewish. And we know very clearly there are very specific laws about being a creditor. If you take a pledge, it could be a coat or something like that, you must return it to the lender at night. You're not allowed to go into his house. It says, Al tihye kanoshe, don't be like a creditor. We're not allowed to act like a creditor. As much as the Torah requires the lender, the borrower to return, but the lender is not allowed to oppress the borrower in any way. Surely it's out of the question to enslave the children of the borrower. So we see that there was some kind of moral deterioration within Jewish society. And we have the lone Elisha who is willing to help her. And the deterioration and the failure to do chesed is also mirrored in the Parsha, because we have Sodom being destroyed in our Parsha, as is explained, because of their wickedness, particularly, as tradition explains, in not helping others, not doing chesed, not having guests, not giving charity, and so on. So now let's look at the three aspects of the Parsha. It begins with a blessing of livelihood. It continues with the blessing of children. And it essentially concludes with a blessing of health, not only being born, but surviving. And these are the three blessings, the pillars of blessing in Judaism. It's called Banei Chai Umezena, having children, having health, and having livelihood. And so these are all encapsulated in this Haftarah. Indeed, there's an interesting story about the relationship between these things, and that will come in part 3.